Hi, this is Chris German. Welcome back to the Apartment Dealer Show. Do we have a treat for you today? Given the flux in the real estate market that we've experienced here now for over a year, we knew it was time to sit down again with none other than Bruce Norris, who recently released a report, 1% or a lost decade. Now, you can only imagine what that means when it comes to real estate values, and that's why we have Bruce with us here today. What is he getting at? When he has looked at the charts and figures that he's relied on now for 4 decades to make millions and millions of dollars himself in investment real estate and educating others and helping them make millions, what does he see in the market where he would even mention a lost decade? That's why he's here with us today. Now, be sure to subscribe to our channel. If you own multifamily investment property, investment real estate, keep in mind, things are not getting any easier. There's current challenges that we cannot go it alone. And the trajectory of our financial legacy in investment real estate is going to be predicated on the information, resources, and network of professionals we're relying on to make those decisions when it comes to our real estate portfolio. So here we have with you Mr. Bruce Norris of the Norris Group, investor, educator, hard money lender for the last 4 decades, here with us to share his insights. So Bruce, welcome back to the show.
Chris, thanks so much.
So this is both a show/presentation for those individuals who have attended our Apartment Owners Educational Luncheon here in the fall of 2023. And of course, now with you being on the opposite end of the country, it gets more challenging for you to be with us in person. I know you would have, the opportunity or the situation been a little bit different, but we appreciate your time today and presenting what you would have presented, even longer formats. So really, to doing it this way, the audience is going to get that much more information. But this category of which you speak in, when it comes to market forecasting and educating investors, what to look at, what are the primary levers that have to be pulled in order for the market to change, or what levers are pulled as a market is changing, is crucial right now, as investors of multifamily properties are feeling the crunch primarily of interest rates, which has had a cascade effect of numbers of sales declining, prices declining slightly, but still declining. And so we are anxious to hear what you have to say. So I'm going to get out of the way, give you the floor, and please give us your perspective on how you see the market now, what's in transition, and how you see the market, especially going forward.
What's interesting about the residential market is very resilient right now. And part of that, well, most of that is because there's not a lot of inventory for sale. And kind of at the end of the presentation, we'll talk about why that is and why that needs not to change. The math is such that you should easily take a 35% hit on residential real estate. That's being prevented by circumstances we've never seen before. So that's a really important thing to look at and say, okay, if that changes, the game changes. So right now we're not behaving as normal. And so that's why it'll be fun doing the presentation today, because it'll take us all the way back to 1980. And this scenario is replicated now 4 times. A little bit different ending each time. There's always a twist, but it's very interesting to have studied it for this long. And it's been the joy, honestly, been a joy to take a look at these charts and actually come up with a conclusion that's been mostly accurate. And as you know, Chris, whenever you put something in writing, you're stuck with it. Mm-hmm. So when you say this is going to happen in 8 years, people are calling you the next night. Look, that's not happening yet. Right. So there's some stress to that, but fortunately, most of those long-term predictions were very accurate.
That's why we have you here today, because there's a lot of talking heads, of course, now today. There's plenty of negative news that's being peddled in social media, print, and so forth. But you, since the 90s, have been able to accurately predict the different changes in the cycles here. So,
yeah, it's important to get emotion out of the way and also get what you want to happen out of the way. When I hear a lot of people talking, I just think, okay, you had a roadmap that you were hoping showed up. Mm-hmm. And then, so that's what you're stating will occur. And yet there's not a lot of evidence of that. One of the things we're going to bring up is that historically affordability gains points in a stretch like this. So it's a good question. Is that a positive thing for every other chart? And so the people that want that to occur have no idea what goes along with the history of that journey. And so that's a journey that we're someday going to go through, but it's painful. Mm. I've been in the real estate investor world for over 40 years. I never thought that I would take a look at charts to tell me what was next to do in my career, but it kind of turned out that way. So over that journey, we've bought probably about 1,600 houses, made many thousands of loans, and taught a lot of people the business. So it's been a lot of fun and the joy of my life. After I've been in the business for 15 years, I had an interesting thing happen one day. My son Aaron graduated from high school. I bought him a Honda Civic for $15,700, and then 2 days later bought a house in California in Riverside County for $13,300. And what bothered me, that bothered me just enough, the fact that a car costs more than a 3-bedroom house, but it also bothered me that it was on a VA list and the investor didn't even get a chance to bid on it until all of the owner occupants said no. Now this was on the list for $15,000. The rent for the house was $500. So somebody could have bought it and had a payment on a $15,000 mortgage. Every VA in the world said no. So it went to the investor world and I was the only bidder. So I got the maximum discount you could and bought it for $13,300. But when that happened, I had one of those aha moments and went, okay, how do houses get less than cars? And how does a VA property stay on a list and I'm the only one in the country that wants it? That's one of those moments where you go, that's pretty uncomfortable. So what the heck's happened to real estate? So I went to the library and the goal was to read somebody that had figured the cycles out. And so I went and got microfilm and I looked up every article written about price movement for real estate for 25 years, from 1970 to 1995. I read every one of them. No one had ever said this is coming in advance over a long duration. So I said, I don't know if it's possible, but I'm going to see if I can figure it out. So I went to the library and I had no idea what mattered, what didn't, but I started writing down data for every category I thought might matter. How much inventory was for sale, affordability, interest rates, unemployment, on and on. And I compiled all those charts. It took me almost a year and a half to do that. And then in December of 96, I went to Maui on a vacation and I had printed all these charts. I had no idea what mattered, but I decided I would see if I could get a sequence that replicated itself. And so I got 2 yardsticks and I put the charts on the floor. And what I was looking for was a domino chart that started other progressions, but it had to be every time. And so that's what I did. And I thought, you know what? I think I actually have figured it out. So at the time I did all that, I was never thinking of writing a report. But then I thought, I'm going to share this because I think it's pretty cool. So this is our first report, why real estate prices will double in the next 8 years. When I wrote this, it had gone down for 6 years straight. And everyone in the world of real estate was so happy that I wrote this. No one believed a word of it, but it was a pleasant thing to say. Over the next 8 years, prices doubled, and then they kept on going up beyond reason. And then I had another moment where I went, wow, this has completely gone crazy. We're going to have another problem pretty soon. Excuse me. So in 2006, I wrote The California Crash. And this was written when things were still booming. So if you want to take a lot of heat, get in front of realtors, mortgage lenders, and investors when everything is working like a charm, and you tell them, get the heck out of here, including builders. So one of the debates I had was in front of the California Builders Association in 2006. against a Wall Street top-notch person that was an analyst for builders. And I'm telling him I would get the heck out of here, sell every lot, sell every house, buy the stuff back 20 cents on the dollar later. That just was received with a grain of salt until about a year and a half later when it hit the fan. So that's kind of the history of the big swings that we predicted. And it's important to note that it's not everybody does an upcycle and a down cycle. You usually get somebody that's very bullish and constantly bullish and right once in a while, or they're constantly negative and they're right once in a while. What's really fun is to figure out the turning points of both cycles. And that's been fun to do. So California has explosive markets. What's really interesting about this, and it's, whenever I've done my share of debating, there'll be a common statement. Of course, when interest rates go up, prices go down. And I just think you just really need to look at two charts to know that's not true. From 1974, this is a price chart for California. About 1974, interest rates were 7.5%. And then they went up to over 15 in 1980. And that journey where interest rates doubled, prices tripled. So anyone that says when interest rates go up, prices go down, and that's an automatic, no, sometimes they triple. So that's kind of crazy, but that wasn't the only triple. We tripled again after 96 and excessively so, but from say 96 to 2007, we went from 180 to 560 and over triple. So California has cycles and we have explosive markets. And so the key is to knowing, is there a formula that says this is over? Because emotionally, you won't know that. So this is one of the comps. So when I figured out this first cycle a long time ago, affordability was a key component of when something ended. It looked like that was the first domino that fell, and then it tipped over other dominoes, which is really important to know. What's interesting about affordability hitting a low, it means the least amount of people can afford the house. It doesn't mean they don't want it. It actually means the opposite. It means everyone wants it. That's how you get to a low affordability number. So this next chart is we've renamed it, but this is actually a calculation of what percentage of the California income earner has to go to a residential purchase if they put 20% down. So that's why it's nice to go back all the way to 1980 and 81. You can see we got crazy in 80 and 81, got crazy again in 89, crazier yet in 2006, and duplicated that in 2022. So we renamed this, calling it a moodometer. And why that's appropriate is the mood of the participants is desperate to have one. And that's why you have price increases that get crazy. So if you're trying to buy a house in 2021, good luck. So your wife and you are going, oh my gosh, we love this house. And 20 bids later, the house is 80 grand more. And your wife looks at you and go, this is terrible. I want to get the next one. And guess what? You do. Mm-hmm. You outbid the next 20 people. And there we go. But when it ends at that affordability number, then a transition happens. So look at this chart. So if you think about this is capacity in 1989 and 2006. That's the heights of what we can spend out of our money. And then it changes a lot. How long do you stay at capacity? Not very long. But what's really interesting about the human nature side of things, now take a look at, you're at about 70% in 2007, and in 2009, you're below 30. It's at 28%. So now this stuff is on sale. Was taking almost 70% of your dough. Now it's taking 28. Did human beings want it? No. Of course not. There's fear in the market. So this is why I called this a moodometer. It calculates the human participation. And what we had to do in 2009 was we had to give you an $8,000 bonus for you to buy a property at a 60% already at a 60% discount. Mm-hmm. That's the human nature side. So first of all, don't think that just because we're hanging around the peak number, which we kind of are, you have to look at the history and say, has that ever happened? Have we ever just stayed consistently over 60% for years and years? Never. So we have to really figure out what's next for the housing market. And could there be a unique thing that's going to allow that to continue? Yeah, that's what's fun about charts, is that, yeah, maybe there is. So once again, the affordability low gets hit, and then there's a reaction. Now, you can hit the affordability low at all kinds of interest rates, but the reaction of the charts that are next is always the same. So it doesn't matter that you hit 17% in 1980 at 16 or 17% interest. The reaction was the same as it was in 89 and 2007. So the first thing that happens is inventory starts to linger. You can't afford it, and people can't get a yes answer from a lender, and so the market cools. Now, how's that for a bad chart of inventory? In 2 years from 1980, let's take a look at the single family. You have about 4 months of inventory, and by the 1982, you're about 16 months. If you're a condo, oh, look at 82. I'm sorry, I got the wrong one. Houses were like 22 months, and condos over 30 months. Have you ever seen numbers like that in the MLS? Probably not.
Right.
Hasn't happened since then. But what's really interesting is what happened to price, and we'll talk about in a second. So every time you hit 17% affordability, within 2 years, you have inventory explode. Every time, no matter what the interest rate is. Also, sales take a hit. So once again, every time you hit 17% affordability, the next 2 years, tank. Are we doing that now? Yes. Sales in residential real estate are tanking. New construction dives. So you hit the peak. By the way, the builders are the worst timing experts in the world. And it's because the news that they get is so late in the cycle. So if you're building a home, let's be fair, if you were building a home in 2005, you had people lining up to buy it. And then all of a sudden, look at that chart. In 2009, you didn't build very much because you were auctioning off everything you built and getting the heck out of Dodge. So the general contractor reaction is usually late because they're getting very positive information right to the brink of disaster. They don't have a very good formula for getting the heck out of Dodge. Unemployment 2 years after you hit 17%, affordability goes up every time. Trustee sales go up. And this is a really important chart, as we'll see, because you're trying to figure out. So me as an investor, I'm looking at these charts and so, okay, it looks like everything replicates, and yet you had different results. So you have trustee sales going up. That's kind of weird when it does happen. That's an exact percentage rise in the 70s and the 90s, and then crazy numbers up in 2008. So we take a look and say, okay, what matters? Why do prices get damaged? So this first scenario from 1980 to 89, but let's just take a look at a shorter period of time. 1980 is when interest rates, I borrowed money in 1980 to become an investor, and I had a free and clear house. I borrowed at 17.5. So it doesn't get worse timing than that. But that was the interest rates at the time. So remember the inventory there 20 some months of inventory of houses, 30 some months of condos. What was the price damage in 1980? 10% unemployment, foreclosures went up 888%. The answer is 0. How's that possible? 17% interest, 20 some months of inventory, and no price damage. See, that's what keeps a guy like me up at night going, okay, that should have resulted in really bad price damage, and it did not. So what's nice is you have a 40-year history you can look at and go, okay, let's see if something else matters a lot. So this is a ratio of trustee sales to sales in the 80s. And so when you look at this chart, it never got much over 25% or 1 in 4 comps. So if I'm an appraiser, I could probably ignore that comp. That isn't the market. It's a piece of the market, but it's not going to dictate the price of everything else. And so, okay. And by the way, this is how you figure stuff out. If you have a clean slate, this is the best way to do it, is don't go into anything with a conclusion. Look for the obvious, and maybe the first time. It may be obvious, but it may be the first time in history it's ever occurred. So now you go into the 90s. Now in the 90s, we didn't have 22 months of inventory. We had 10 months of inventory. We didn't have 15% interest rate. We had 9. And yet we had price damage, and we had gradual price damage till it got down about 10%. So here's the ratio of trustee sales. They got into about 4 in 10 of the sales, 40%. So I was an auction buyer at that time. I would go to all these REO auctions and buy things really cheaply. It was a great time to be an investor who could hustle. And I guess that's good advice for anybody. But if there was a 400 house auction, I went to see 400 houses because I knew there would be no one else sitting in that auction that did that. And that was a big advantage. But this trustee sale, when it got to about 4 out of 10, it did start to affect appraisals, and it did start to affect the market mentality. So that hurt the market, but only gradually. Now you go to the one we recently experienced from 2007 to 2009, and then it just camped out for 3 more years after that. Prices went down, incredibly. So did we have 30 months of inventory? Did we have 17% interest rate? No. We had 6% interest rates. We had 8 months of inventory. So how could we have a devastating price damage? It's because this ratio dominated what something was worth. It got into 70% of what was for sale and what closed. So if you had a Moreno Valley house, and this was a real number, 365 was the number of a house that we ended up buying at 65 grand. We fixed it for 20 grand, put it up for sale for 125, had 25 offers in a day, and then the appraisal came back at 95. So the market raising their hand in a day saying 25 takers at 125 was trumped by the REO comps saying, no, that's not worth anything. And that's what's devastating. So if this chart is the most accurate predictor of price damage, then you have to go and say, what's next for right now? Are we going to have a ton of foreclosures? So that's really the question that you've got to ask. Or is there another possible group of inventory that could explode and become so motivated it brings too much inventory that's motivated to sell at any price? So that was the advantage, if you will, of the lender, is they no longer could get the loan amount. And that was a process, by the way. So if you're an REO broker and took back that 365 house, you listed it with an agent for 315. Then you fired him and listed it at 255, and then 195, and then 155, and then 95, and then, oh my God, you just took whatever offer showed up, and that was that. So, okay. So that's the ratio of the trustee sales. So if you have a very bad category, control the market, you're going to have some price damage. So I want you to remember that this is the mood of the participant. It's the percentage you're willing to spend of your budget to a house. And that's for a group. So this is really telling because we don't stay at the top very long. And you need a motivated couple to keep on bidding on stuff. And that's what happens at these cycles. At the end of each of these cycles, if you're a seller, you're the happiest guy. No telling what you'll get. I mean, we were involved in that, in 2021. We'd have stuff for sale and let's try 500. And then we'd get 575 and we'd get 3 more buyers at 575 that went to 3 other houses because that was the sale. That was the price. But those days end. So you have to be really careful thinking, okay, well, we're good. Well, tell me when you've landed at 70% or 60% and stayed there for years. And the answer is never. So you have to be really careful thinking, oh, we're good. Yeah, no. The mood has to be euphoric for that to continue. Now, what happens if there's so few properties for sale that the buyers that want something outnumber what's available? That's what's interesting, and that is kind of what's happening right now. So let's go to the reason the shortage of houses exists. This is an origination by FICO score, but it also calculates how much in dollars was refied. So the green line is the super credit, good credit people. over 760, but they refied in the course of a couple of years, trillions of dollars of mortgages. And they didn't do it just once. If they had a 5.5 and go to 4, hey, we'll sign up. Well, went to 3.5, let's sign up. It went to 2 3/4, let's sign up. My contractor has a mortgage on his house at 2.3, 30-year fixed. So here's a good question. When's he going to go anywhere? The most valuable asset he has on that piece of real estate is a fixed rate mortgage below inflation. So the odds of that house getting on the market is so low, it probably doesn't exist. Now think about all the houses that have that mortgage. His mortgage is so cheap that if he lost his job, let's say he had a job, he's my contractor, but let's say he had a normal job and he lost it, for the first time in history, he could rent that for a positive cash flow. Well, that's a nice choice. Hey, maybe I'll come back 5 years from now and I'll just reoccupy my house. He could do that. That's never occurred. We've never had the range of interest rates we had that are in place for 30 years. And see, Chris, that's the difference in your industry. You got to enjoy that for 5 years.
Right.
But the residential gets to enjoy it for the duration. And that's why the damage is different. The average LTV homes exploded in price. And when you have 42% of your value in a mortgage and the mortgage is 3%, your payment's less than rent. What are the odds of you doing anything? Really low. Here's the existing homes for sale. So this goes back quite a ways, all the way to about 1980. And you're usually hovering in the 2 million range or more. And right now we're, I can't see the rest of the chart, but it's around 1 million or so. So that's part of the problem. If this is a national chart, we have a lot less volume of sales, but we even have a bigger shortage of houses. And it's hard to have a foreclosure when the dominant payment is less than rent. So that big pile of foreclosures that caused the damage last time, I don't think is going to show up. So that category has to show up from something else. And maybe it's unemployment, but again, there's options. This is the average U.S. home ownership timeframe. So way back in 2000, and there's a different chart that I probably should have. This is average, and it's doubled in the last 10 years. There's a median that's at 13 years. Well, nothing with the low interest rate world is going to make that get shorter time frame. The people that bought those homes are going to own them for a very long time, and you're going to have less properties for sale than ever come from existing inventory. This is a calculation by a gentleman who has a housing report, missing listings in Southern California, and they keep growing. And so the listings are down by 42%. That's why you have stability in the pricing category, because there's a lot less people trying to sell. The other thing that's going on is, this is another historical look all the way back to the 80s, where new housing participation as far as percentage of the market generally is around 15%, and now it's over 30%. Well, why is that? Nothing existing is for sale. And so the demand flows to the builder. And I think they're quite shocked by that. I thought they're going, oh man, we're in big trouble. And all of a sudden they realize, maybe their sales haven't doubled. That's probably true, but they're being supported because people can't find existing inventory and you really prefer a new one. So that's who ends up getting the business. So that's what's unique about this cycle, is that for the first time ever, we landed at the end, for the fourth time, we landed at a crazy number where a group, us together, were so excited to buy something. As a group, we got to 70% payment to earnings, and we're hanging around there because there's so little for sale. The buyers outnumber the sellers. So what you really have to do is watch. If there's some massive number of unemployment and people put their listing up, That could be one thing. You know, what's interesting in California is that you could pass enough bad laws that make people that own single family rentals decide to sell. And in California, that represents what, ballpark of 50 or 45% of all the inventory. If you make it so uncomfortable for you to have a rental because you're favoring the tenant so much, you could have a bunch of houses.
So that's interesting, Bruce. So there's a new measure that's going to be on the California ballot 2024. I don't know if you've heard this, for rent control. What it'll do is a couple of things here. Right now, single family homes are not under rent control. Under the current California rent control, single family homes will be under rent control if this were to pass. Second, properties that were built within the last 15 years are not under rent control under the current law. This new measure says, regardless of construction date, you're under rent control. And the last one, which would be the nail in the coffin, in my opinion, is vacancy decontrol. If you get a vacant unit, they can regulate the asking rent for the property. So it's, there's some very outlandish terms within this measure. I imagine, I'm hopeful it'll get voted down, but the problem is rent control got voted down in 2018.
Yeah.
And then in 2019, the politicians passed it. So it's interesting that you just said the stock of single family houses here in California, 45% of it or so is actually owned as rentals. So now if those come under rent control, how much goes to market?
A lot. And here's why, Chris, because the price is so different than where you might go. So Florida's had a pretty good time with prices going up. It's still half of California's median price. So you could literally sell a home in Moreno Valley that's built in 1960 in a bad area and get a brand new house in Florida that have, in Moreno Valley, you're going to attract the lowest quadrant of renter that causes you grief and doesn't pay you. And 75% of the renters don't even want the area. Now you go to a new house where everyone wants it. That's a pretty easy decision to make. And,
Sure.
It's interesting, after you said, we actually interviewed the council. We had a seminar. We had 2 or 3 of the council members on a panel because I was interested in the same thing. How did we vote against rent control? And now we have it. So what was the process for that? So they explained to us the process of how that works. And what's really interesting is if you have a coronavirus event, all bets are off. Even the people on the council can get trumped by the governor, who can literally enact anything he wants without a check and balance. Or actually trump and say no to something that the council wants. So that's a lot of power. But that's why, that's a really, it's sad to watch California do that, but that's exactly when I decided to leave because of that comment. It's just like, wow, I do not control my own destiny. And as a flipper, what was not uncommon, matter of fact, it was almost every time we'd buy a house. So we bought 80 houses a year. What percentage of them were still occupied by the person that didn't make the payment? Almost all of the time. Why? Because they had gotten notice that, you can get cash for keys if you stay. And so that was just part and parcel of what we had to do. Well, every once in a while, you'd have somebody who gets an attorney and they stayed a year, cost us $50,000 in legal fees. You get tired of that.
Yeah.
So I think that, when I started thinking about where would the inventory come from? Interesting. It could come from people that decide, I don't want to have a rental. And the stuff that you just said, that could be a game changer when you start saying it's even going to get more restrictive. And now rent control is, what is the max rent control? I just spoke to somebody that said there's something talking about 1% a year.
Well, in the current law, 10% ceiling, and unless you own in a city that has some type of special restrictions, and there's a number of cities now that have special restrictions, but in general, right now it's 10%. I don't know that this new measure that's going to be on the ballot next year changes the ceiling. I just know that the main talking points everyone's talking about is the three that I gave you, because as an investor, those are the three that bring most concern. Now, let me ask you this. So in preparation for our discussion, I took part in another market forecasting type seminar. Can't remember the name of the gentleman who shared most of the data. It was compelling. I'll give you his punchline and we'll see what you think. So he says, look, if you look at these charts, and he laid out charts and so forth, every time the federal government has ever increased interest rates, they typically go too far and then they pull back too slow, but they always pull back. And their belief is that the government's going to pull back on rates next year, that inflation is already cooling beyond the pace they really wanted. So it'll give the Fed the ability to pull back on rates. And next year, you're going to see an interest rate probably around 5%. And then the following year, you're going to see something in the 4s. And they're predicting that this is going to be either the third or fourth best real estate market that we've ever seen because of the pent-up demand, people that want to be buyers and simply are not because of the interest rate, millennials, those individuals that are about 35 or so are such a big number of the population. And so you put those two together, or three, pent-up demand, the number of buyers who are millennials and who also make $150,000 or more a year. Plus, now the rates are pulled back, and anything from where we are, I imagine the average consumer is going to see like, oh, it's go time. We were dealing with 7. Now they're talking about 5 3/4. Honey, we better jump. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to first talk about that last statement. So the buyer that's holding his ground and saying, I'm not buying at 7, could certainly want to pull and say, let's buy at 5.5. What's interesting is, will the person that owns the loan at 3 say the same thing? And I doubt it. So they've got a point. You're going to end up with more demand landing on very similar supply. Now, here's the other thing. So that chart of moodometer calculates the mood of the participant. When have we ever stayed at maximum? The answer is never, but we've never had this circumstance. You have an artificial way of having almost nothing in the marketplace, and now you're going to give somebody a more reasonable interest rate, and they may think, this is the last time I'll ever see 5%. So you may have a reaction. I think this is what's neat about looking at 40 years of charts and realizing, wow, we have never seen this set of charts. So Chris, you could have a lengthy period of time where euphoria, the percentage of it, what it takes to buy your house at 60% or over 50% for a rather lengthy period of time, and it's never happened. But it really gets back to your demand is outpacing the supply. And that could be around. Now, do I think that you're going to have price increases? Well, that would really necessitate that mood staying and being elevated as opposed to some other math formula. So I really think, I went out 10 years when we wrote the latest report, because I said it's either 1% mortgage rate or a lost decade. Now, just like in rents, in Florida, we raised rents 50% in 2 years. I'm not anticipating that we're going to raise rent 10% a year for the next 5 years.
Sure.
I kind of think we used it up.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with price increases. You had a 50% price increase. We went from $600,000 to $900,000 in a month anyway, for a month in California. You went up 50% in 24 months. And then it came back down and it's hovering at 8 something. The odds of that going way up in the next 5 years, I think, is 0. Because your participant has to be euphoric. What's forcing euphoria is the small group of buyers is more urgent than the group of sellers. That's kind of what's going on. You're just so sick of not getting it. Or, your wife is going, honey, you've got to get out of here. We get a chance to get a rate at 5, it'll just sound a lot better than 7. And it is.
Right.
I just checked with interest rates yesterday. If you pay a point, it's 7 and a quarter fixed, 30-year, 7.5. It's two. If it's wait a minute. If I pay 1 point, it's 7.5. 2 points is 7.25.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about that? We're closing a sale today that's $560. The peak price that it ever got a year ago was $575. When we started construction of that house, we thought it was 4.25. So the price increase is almost stuck, except for whatever that amount is. It's a very small percentage of 3%. And the interest rate's gone from under 3 to 7. And the only reason that's possible, we had multiple offers inside of a day, is because it's a new house and it's also the smallest one we built. So that's what people want.
Of course, our audience owns multifamily properties. And so I can imagine they're listening to this and they're saying, okay, how does this impact me as the landlord? And it really is about, can your tenants afford a home? The moment that they can afford homes, like we saw in 2008, 9, 10, 11, and vacancy shot up, that would do the same thing here. Is that many of it's interesting, the millennial generation, articles being written 5 years ago said they prefer not to own homes, they're different than their parents, they don't want the tie to the maintenance and what have you. That has completely changed, and probably because they've gotten wiser and older and find value now.
They didn't get married when they were 20.
Right. Yeah. So
yeah.
And so change of lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so as of right now, homes are not affordable. And because housing is so expensive, inflation is eating up their savings. They're not able to save for a down payment. So I don't see that having any effect on landlords anytime soon. In other words, our rental rates should, even though they've pulled back slightly, should still stay aggressive. Buildings, although vacancy has creeped up some, relatively speaking, should stay full. But it seems like it's the interest rates. If interest rates were to make a dramatic turn, then many as individuals become buyers. But then it's the question of the inventory. Even though they qualify, has the demand now that the home prices is what's causing the problem, and the inventory, not necessarily the rate. The conclusion you've come to then is, unless interest rates were to do something dramatic, we're gonna stall out for roughly a decade, given all the other levers, the affordability and employment and so forth.
Yeah, you're definitely usually a few years as you gain back affordability. You just have charts that are not cooperative with employment, and inventory usually goes up and all that. But again, this is unusual, and that's why it's so nice to have looked at this for 40 years. And I'm so glad that I hand wrote this stuff myself. So when I have a category, I hand wrote the chart, all the numbers. When I do a new chart, I'm not just looking at those numbers. I'm rhyming it with all of those other charts. I did that over with my life.
Well, we thank you, Bruce, for your time. You are a gem to the real estate industry. I know you have hopes of retiring, but I don't know that you can. I think there's going to be too much movement in the next year or two, and people are going to be too curious to know, what does Mr. Bruce Norris make of this? So we look forward to chatting with you in the future.
All right, Chris. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
All right, sir. Take care.
All right. Okay. Bye.
Well, there you have it, folks. Is it a lost decade, or are we going to see a significant change in interest rates? I guess at this point, it's anyone's guess, but at least you're more equipped, informed. You've seen the charts that Bruce himself has used for 4 decades to make millions of dollars in real estate. Who's to say you couldn't replicate? Take those charts with you, begin to map out where you own. What are these different indexes doing in the areas of which you're an investor? Be sure to subscribe to our channel, turn on the alerts, share this video with other investors that you know. We're looking to get this content into the hands of as many real estate investors as we possibly can. Owning real estate has never been so complicated, with so much risk, and confusing at many times, especially when it comes to being a landlord. It is about having the right information and the resources and network of professionals to ensure you're not only getting the accurate information, but then you're able to view through that lens what's taking place in the market, be able to block out the noise, and then be able to make decisions based upon facts and not our emotions that many times will lie to us. I hope you have found this informative. We look forward to sharing more and more content with you in the coming weeks and months. And until then, Chris German from the Apartment Dealer wishing you positive cash flow, tenants who behave, and much protection from Uncle Sam. Till next time.